ANNO Mutationem is a game that I've admired from afar for many months at this point. A single screenshot was enough to draw me in and pique my interest. I did actually request a review code for it a while back, but unfortunately I was unsuccessful. Still though, I wanted to play the game, and as luck would have it, it was on sale recently, so I picked it up. After putting a good chunk of time into it, for my tastes, I'd say it looks incredible, plays really well, has an interesting cyberpunk story, and while it can be a little slow at times, it's still well worth playing. So what's the game all about, and why am I recommending it to you? Well, ANNO Mutationem is an action-adventure game with some light RPG mechanics. As you can see, it's set in a cyberpunk world and features a somewhat unique presentation. It mixes both 2D pixel art graphics and 3D models to create its visual style, and as far as I'm concerned, it looks absolutely incredible. Now obviously, I know not everyone is into pixel art, and funnily enough, I think that applies to some of my actual viewers and subscribers. It's understandable though, if it's not your thing and you'd prefer 3D models to go with your 3D world that you explore, then I hear you and I get it. I'm personally a bit more old school. I grew up in the 16-bit era and I've always loved pixel art, so for me, this looks brilliant. You play as Anne Flores, who is essentially an unofficial detective in the futuristic Scop City. Many citizens of the city are becoming afflicted by the strange Mechanica virus, which takes over people's bodies and slowly turns them into machines, or more accurately, I guess, cyborgs. Anne actually has her own condition which is dealt with and explained throughout the game, and it's worth noting that the story does take a turn into the supernatural later in the game. There's a lot to unpack in regards to the narrative, with a lot of threads and side plots, and as usual, I won't spoil that for you here. I think some players will find the story a bit confusing or perhaps a little bit nebulous, but I personally found it to be really interesting. I wouldn't call it edge-of-your-seat storytelling or anything like that, but I thought it was good enough. Gameplay-wise, you'll start at Anne's apartment, and I have to admit that I spent around 10 minutes at this location just pressing things and opening the shutters to the window because, well, it just looks so impressive to me. You can also save your game here, and if you want to, you can change Anne's clothes to something that you prefer. In terms of basic gameplay, you'll be moving around the world, exploring, talking to characters, engaging in combat, and following the main story. You'll be surprised at just how many places you can visit and how many things you can interact with in the environments. I was thinking that this would all be for show, but there's a surprising amount of depth to this world when you actually explore it for yourself. You often look at these indie games and think, oh, this will be a good 5 or 6 hour game, walk around some pretty environments, fight some bad guys, beat the story, and that'll be that. From my experience though, that really doesn't seem to be the case with this game. There is a lot going on in this world. It's just very dense, and from about an hour into the game, I settled into my sofa and started to really pay attention to what was going on. It really grabbed me, and it feels like it wants you to see what it has to offer, and I, of course, obliged. Something that did surprise me is the use of voice acting. There's quite a lot of it here, and I think it's actually pretty good. Again, I was ready for this game to be completely text-based, but nope, there's actually a good deal of quality voice acting, and I think it really elevates the game overall. Combat plays out on a fixed 2D plane as opposed to exploration, which is more of a 2.5D affair. You can move left and right, jump, use light and heavy attacks, shoot and block. You are able to upgrade Anne as you progress through the game by equipping better weapons, which can be crafted or purchased. There's a skill tree to unlock and new abilities to learn as well. You'll mostly be fighting things like machines, humans, and monsters, but there is of course a few boss battles as well. The game doesn't actually have a difficulty setting, but some encounters and some of the bosses can be a bit of a challenge. It's worth noting that you can't just roam around the world and get into random battles either. Most of the fights that you engage with are going to be story-based, although later in the game you can backtrack in order to revisit areas or complete side quests for extra resources. I personally found the combat to be pretty good but not great. It's perfectly serviceable, but it feels a little bit imprecise at times and a tiny bit messy. I know that sounds kinda bad, but it's really not. It only felt like that a couple of times, so I think it's more than acceptable. I actually think that I would have enjoyed the game a bit more if it leaned more into the RPG realm. That's obviously not what the developers wanted to create though, and that's fine, they didn't make this for me, it's just my personal preferences showing through. If you ask me what I would have liked to have seen, I guess something along the lines of random battles and more of an emphasis on looting and upgrading your character, things like that. But I think for what it is and how cheap it is to purchase, the developers have done a very good job indeed. The game is only available on PS4, PS5 and PC currently. Sadly, there is no standard physical version of the game. The only physical copy of the game in existence has been put out by Limited Run Games, but it's currently sold out. I'm just going to put myself on record here and say that I do not like Limited Run Games and I will not support them. I would of course urge all of my viewers to do the same, but if you do buy from them, I absolutely will not judge you. In my opinion, ANNO Mutationem is a visually charming game backed up with solid gameplay systems and an interesting story. It's not perfect of course, far from it, but what's here was very enjoyable to me and its graphical style is something that will stay with me for years to come. I think some players may find the narrative to be a little bit unfocused and even slow at times, but if you can stay with it, I think you'll enjoy yourself. Ultimately, this is an indie game being sold at a bargain price, and as usual, whenever that's the case, I do recommend that you give it a shot if you like what you've seen and it looks interesting to you. The amazing visuals are what drew me in at first, but to the game's credit, it did manage to keep me entertained throughout. For me, the graphics are perfect, but the game overall isn't. So I think if you temper your expectations just a little bit and go into the game with an open mind, you'll probably have a really good time with this one. If you enjoy the video, I really hope you'll consider subscribing, and if you like what I do and want to help support the channel, please check out the first link in the video description down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.